The soldier hit the floor before the paramedics could even call it. 3 entrance wounds. Clustered. Deliberate. Someone had been trained to put them there. Nurse Cara Dillon saw it from across the ER bay and felt her stomach drop. Not from shock, but from recognition. She knew that pattern. She had documented that pattern in places that didn't exist on any official map. She took one step forward. "Back to your station," the hospital director said, cutting her off without looking at her. "Dr. Kessler's team has it." The man on the gurney had maybe 12 minutes. Cara knew it. Nobody else in that room did, and they just told her to leave. If this story already has you on edge, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. The night Cara Dillon almost walked out of Mercy Hollow Regional Medical Center for the last time started the same way most bad nights did, with someone underestimating her. She had been on her feet for 19 hours straight, not because she was scheduled for a double. She had taken Priya's shift when Priya's kid spiked a fever at noon, and then she had picked up the back half of Dominic's rotation because Dominic had pulled something in his shoulder moving a patient and was useless with a blood draw. Neither of them had asked. Cara had just looked at the board, seen the gaps, and filled them. That was how she operated. Quietly. Without announcement. Mercy Hollow sat on the edge of Duskfield, Colorado. A city that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a mountain town or a suburb. Population 80-something thousand, depending on which census you believed. The hospital was mid-sized, perpetually understaffed, and run with the particular brand of chaos that comes from too much bureaucracy trying to manage too little budget. The ER smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee and the faint ghost of cigarette smoke from the ambulance bay, where somebody was always sneaking a cigarette they weren't supposed to have. Cara had worked here for 2 years and 11 months. She knew every broken ceiling tile. She knew which IV pump would alarm falsely if you didn't seat the cassette just right. She knew that the warming cabinet in Trauma 2 ran 4 degrees hot, and you had to account for that. She had learned the building the way a person learns a language, not from a textbook, but from living inside it until it stopped feeling foreign. What she had never learned was how to make herself visible to the people who made decisions. "Wardboard's a mess," she told the charge nurse, Jamie Okafor, at the 9 o'clock huddle. "We've got a chest pain in 4 who's been waiting for cardiology consult for 2 hours. His pressure's been trending down." Jamie nodded without writing anything down. "Kessler's aware." "Is he coming down?" "He's aware," Jamie repeated, with the tone of someone who had already had this conversation twice tonight and didn't want to have it a third time. Cara let it go. She went back to bed 4 and sat with Mr. Aldecoa, 67 years old, former electrician, terrified in the way that big, quiet men sometimes get terrified when their bodies stop obeying them. And she talked him through it. She didn't tell him everything was fine because she didn't know that it was. She told him she was watching him. She told him his numbers were being tracked. She told him the moment anything shifted, she would be right there. He gripped her hand once, briefly, and then let go. That was the part of this job nobody put on a performance review. At 10:47 p.m., the ambulance bay doors crashed open. Cara heard it from the medication room, that specific combination of hydraulic wheeze and metal bang that meant a trauma was rolling fast. She capped the syringe she was prepping, dropped it on the tray, and moved toward the sound before she consciously decided to. The paramedic leading the gurney was breathing hard. Young guy Marcus something. She had seen him before. His voice was clipped and high in a way that meant he was keeping himself together through deliberate effort. "Male, appears mid-30s, found down in the Talbot Street parking structure, 3 GSWs to the torso, pressure's tanking. We pushed 2 liters en route and barely moved the needle." Cara was already at the bedside rail. She looked at the patient, and something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with temperature. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray Henley, boots that were too good for the clothes, the kind of boots that cost real money and were chosen for function over style. His face was turned to the side, jaw tight with the specific tension of someone who had trained themselves not to make noise from pain. He was conscious, barely, but that wasn't what stopped her. It was the wounds. 3 entry points, left lateral thorax, spaced in a pattern that could not be, random. That grouping didn't happen from a street shooting. That grouping happened when a shooter had controlled breathing, controlled distance, and a target that had been planned in advance. She had seen it twice before in her life, both times in places she was not supposed to talk about, both times on men who had been specifically chosen to die. Her hands moved to his neck before anyone told her to. Pulse weak, rapid, thready. His oxygen sat was 84 and dropping. "We need to move him to Trauma 1. Trauma 1's occupied." Jamie was at her shoulder. "Dr. Kessler's team is in there with the MVA. Then we use 2. Dr. Kessler needs to authorize. He needs a chest decompression in the next 4 minutes, or we're filling out a different kind of paperwork." Cara kept her voice flat and informational. Not aggressive, just precise. "Get me a 14 gauge and get me Kessler." The patient's hand moved. It was slight, barely a shift of fingers on the gurney rail, but Cara caught it because she was watching everything. She leaned in because she recognized the intention behind it. He was trying to reach her. She put her hand over his. His lips moved. She leaned closer. "Compromised." He couldn't finish. His breath was ragged, catching, the sound of fluid where air should be. "Don't talk," she said quietly. "I've got you." But what she had heard stayed with her, like a splinter she couldn't see but could feel. Dr. Elliot Hartman arrived at 11:02. He was the kind of man who entered rooms as though the room had been waiting for him. Chief of Emergency Medicine, 53 years old, silver-templed, impeccably dressed even at this hour, because Hartman seemed to operate on a separate physical plane where shift work didn't wrinkle his shirt. He had a reputation for clinical precision and an equally strong reputation for not listening to people he considered beneath his attention. Cara was, categorically, beneath his attention. "Status," he said to Jamie, not to Cara. Jamie relayed everything Cara had said, almost word for word, with the slight but significant difference of not mentioning who had said it. Hartman snapped on gloves, approached the patient, did his own assessment with the focused efficiency of someone proving a point, and then looked up. "Tension pneumo, possible hemothorax. Get me thoracic on the phone and prep for needle decompression." "That's what I—" Cara stopped. Not because she lost her nerve, but because finishing the sentence would take time they didn't have, and the patient was more important than the argument. She was already prepping the needle. Hartman looked at her hands, then at her. Something passed across his face that wasn't quite acknowledgement, but was close to it. He didn't tell her to stop. She took that as permission and kept moving. The procedure took 90 seconds. When the pressure released, the patient's oxygen sat began climbing. 86, 88, 91. The room exhaled. Cara stepped back and stripped her gloves. And that was when Director Paul Renwick walked in. Renwick was not a medical man. He held an MBA and a certificate in healthcare administration, and he had been running Mercy Hollow's operations for 3 years on the strength of a cost reduction record that looked better on paper than it felt on the floor. He was 51, heavy through the shoulders, and he wore the expression of a man who considered the ER a liability rather than a function. He looked at the controlled chaos of the room, the nurses moving, the monitors alarming, the patient stabilizing, and his eyes landed on Cara the way eyes sometimes land on the thing that looks out of place. "Who authorized the trauma bay usage, quick?" he asked Hartman. "I did," Hartman said, without looking up from the patient. "I'm asking about the preliminary call, before you arrived." A pause. Hartman said nothing. Renwick turned to Cara directly. "You made the call to bring him in here." "I assessed the patient as critical," Cara said. "I used available resources." "You're a floor nurse." "I'm the person who was standing there." Renwick's expression didn't change, which was somehow worse than if it had. "We have protocols for a reason. You don't have the standing to make trauma bay assignments. That's not me criticizing your instincts. That's me telling you how this hospital functions." "The patient is stabilizing," Renwick said, "under Dr. Hartman's care, which means the situation is handled. And you—" He glanced at the clock on the wall. "You've been on shift since this morning. You're past your hours. Go home, Dillon." The room was quiet in the particular way rooms get when everyone is working very hard to look busy so they don't have to acknowledge what they're witnessing. "I want to monitor the patient for the next hour," Cara said. "His presentation is unusual, and I think I didn't ask what you think. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Renwick said it the way people say things when they've said them before, and they're tired of saying them, which was worse than anger, because it meant he genuinely did not consider her perspective worth the energy of a raised voice. Cara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Hartman, who was busy with the patient's chart and had apparently developed a sudden intense interest in the monitor screen. Then she looked at Jamie, who gave her a microscopic wince that was the closest thing to an apology the charge nurse could offer without creating her own problem. Cara took her stethoscope from her neck and set it on the supply cart. "Fine," she said. "I'll clock out." She walked toward the exit at a pace that wasn't fast enough to look like retreat and wasn't slow enough to look like defiance. Just steady, one foot in front of the other. The security guard at the corridor checkpoint, a young guy named Travis, who she had brought coffee 3 times and who she was pretty sure had a crush on Priya, gave her a look that was half sympathy and half apology. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't trust herself to, right now. The locker room was empty. Her shoes on the tile floor made sounds that echoed. She sat on the bench in front of her locker and didn't open it. 19 hours and 40 minutes. She had come in at 3 in the afternoon on what was supposed to be a day off because someone needed cover, and she had worked through the dinner rush and the post-bar crowd and the 2 car accidents and the allergic reaction and the kid who swallowed a Lego that his mother had been absolutely certain was impossible. And she had done all of it without complaint and with her whole attention, and the way it ended was a man who had never stabilized a tension pneumothorax in his life, telling her she didn't have standing. She put her face in her hands, not crying. She wasn't going to cry about this. She was just tired, in a way that sleep didn't fix. After a minute, she stood up, opened her locker, pulled out her jacket and her bag, and started toward the door. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. Then again. Then, a pattern that wasn't random notification buzz. It was rapid, urgent, the kind of sequence you got when multiple alerts were firing at once. She pulled it out. 3 texts from Jamie. "Where are you? Get back here, now." And then the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a brownout. A full, immediate, total blackout. Every light in the locker room died simultaneously. The ventilation system wound down with a descending hum. The emergency generators kicked in after a 4-second gap that felt much longer, bathing everything in the dim yellow-red of backup power, which meant non-essential systems, which meant the main trauma monitors, which meant... Cara was running before she finished the thought. The corridor was already in controlled panic. Staff were moving fast, speaking in the clipped professional shorthand of people who had trained for emergencies, but not quite this emergency. The electronic door locks had failed over to manual. Patient call lights were dark. The central nursing station's monitors were all black. Jamie grabbed her arm as she came through the ER entrance. "Total grid failure," Jamie said, fast and low. "Backup power's only covering OR and ICU. Trauma monitors are down. The patient you brought in, is he on manual monitoring? We're trying to get someone in there, but Hartman's dealing with the MVA patient who's crashing, and we don't have... I've got him." Cara was already moving. "Get me a handheld pulse ox and a BP cuff. Manual. Now." She pushed through the trauma bay door. The room was dim, lit only by the small battery-powered emergency light in the corner that threw everything into flat shadow. The patient was where she had left him, but his body language had changed. He was moving, not the random movement of someone in distress, deliberate movement. His right hand was reaching under the thin hospital pillow. "Hey!" She crossed the room fast. "Hey, don't!" He grabbed her wrist. His grip was not the grip of a critically injured man. It was precise and controlled, and his eyes, when they found hers in the dim light, were fully focused. "They're already inside," he said. His voice was low and rough but clear. This wasn't a power failure. They cut the grid. "Who cut?" "Listen to me." He tightened his grip. "I need you to understand something before they get to this floor. I need you to understand what I'm carrying and why they can't." He coughed, once, hard, and the clarity in his eyes flickered. He was fighting to stay conscious, and he was winning, but it was costing him. "The unit, Halcyon. You know what that is?" The word landed like something dropped from a height. Cara went very still. She did know what that was. She knew it in the way you know something you were debriefed about and told to forget, something that had your signature on a form in a file that officially didn't exist. She knew it because 3 years ago, in a forward operating base outside a city she still couldn't name publicly, she had treated 4 men from a unit that didn't appear in any command structure she was given, and the officer who debriefed her afterward had been very specific about the word classified, and very specific about what happened to people who forgot what that word meant. She stared at the man on the gurney. "Who are you?" she said. But before he could answer, she heard it, from the corridor, from the direction of the service elevators, the specific sound of boots moving in coordinated pairs, not hospital staff, not the shuffling, task-focused movement of medical personnel. This was different. This was the pattern of people who moved in formation even when they were trying not to. Cara let go of his hand and turned toward the door. Through the small reinforced window in the trauma bay door, in the dim backup lighting of the corridor, she counted 3 figures in gray maintenance uniforms moving toward the nursing station. They were not checking equipment. They were not consulting any work order. They were moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with fixing the power. And one of them, just briefly, turned his head toward the trauma bay door. His eyes scanned the window. Cara stepped back, flat against the wall, out of the line of sight. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. Not racing. That wasn't quite it. It was the thing she had felt once before, on a mountain road outside of a city that didn't exist, when the convoy she was with went quiet because someone on the radio said a word that meant stop moving and do not make a sound. That particular awareness, that specific recalibration of every sense. She looked at the patient. He was watching her. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question. Cara moved to the supply cabinet on the far wall. Her hands went to the latches automatically, and she found the emergency kit. Red case, white cross, the one every trauma bay had to have by code. She pulled it out, set it on the counter, and opened it. Her hands were steady. "I need you to be quiet," she said, "and I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" A pause. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." She pulled the SAT monitor lead and attached it to his finger using the battery-powered portable unit from the kit. His oxygen was holding. 94, stable. His pulse was elevated but not critical. The decompression had bought them time. She moved to the door and looked through the window again. The 3 figures had split. One was near the nursing station. One had gone down the corridor toward the waiting room. The third was unaccounted for. Cara stepped back and scanned the trauma bay. It was approximately 30 feet by 20 feet. One main entrance. One supply corridor access in the back that connected to the sterile supply route. The supply corridor door required a key card, but in a grid failure, the electronic locks defaulted to... She crossed the room, pressed the handle on the supply corridor door. It opened. She turned to the patient. "Can you walk if I help you?" He looked at the IV line in his arm. "If you unhook me." "I'm not unhooking you. The bag comes with us." She found an IV pole in the corner, clamped the bag to it, and handed him the pole. He sat up, slowly, with the kind of careful, managed movement of someone working through significant pain with significant discipline, and swung his legs over the side of the gurney. "This is going to hurt," she said. "Already hurts. More, I mean. I know what you mean." He stood. His face went gray for about 3 seconds and then came back. He gripped the pole and looked at her, and in the dim red-yellow light of the backup emergency lamp, she saw something that she recognized because she had seen it in mirrors in forward operating bases at 3 in the morning. The expression of someone who was running on the last part of their reserve and knew it and was going to keep running anyway. She put her hand on his arm, not holding him up, just there. Contact. Grounding. "With me," she said. They moved through the supply corridor as the sound of coordinated boots reached the trauma bay door. The corridor was narrow and dark, lit only by the glow of the emergency exit signs at either end. The IV pole wheels caught on a floor seam and she caught it before it could clatter. Her other hand was at the patient's side, monitoring his pace. He was moving better than she expected. He had done this before too. She could see it in the way he moved. Economical, deliberate, saving effort. Behind them, she heard the trauma bay door open. A voice said, quietly, to someone, "Clear." And then another voice, further down the corridor from where she had last seen one of them. Nursing station's asking about the blackout. Someone's going to call security in about 2 minutes. We don't need 2 minutes. Cara pressed her back to the corridor wall and held still, her hand on the patient's arm, feeling his pulse through the contact. He had stilled completely, not from weakness, from practice. 20 seconds. The sound of the trauma bay being searched. The systematic nature of it, cabinet by cabinet, corner by corner, was the most frightening part. Not frantic, not rushed, methodical. These were people who had done this in conditions much harder than a dimly lit hospital trauma bay. Then the sound moved, back toward the main corridor. Cara didn't move for another 30 seconds after that. Then she exhaled. "We need to get you somewhere with a lock and a sightline to 2 exits," she said quietly. "You're thinking tactically," he said. "I'm thinking like someone who doesn't want to get you killed after the work I already put in." He made a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, aborted quickly by what was clearly a stab of pain. "Fair." She started moving again. "What's your name?" A beat. "Garrett," he said. "Sergeant First Class Daniel Garrett." "Dillon," she said. "Cara Dillon. I used to be a medic." "I know," he said. She stopped walking, turned and looked at him. In the dark corridor, his face was hard to read, but his voice, when he spoke again, was careful and deliberate and meant to land. "Why do you think they cut the power to the whole hospital, Dillon?" he said. "They didn't just come for me." The emergency exit sign at the end of the corridor buzzed softly in the silence. Cara looked at it for a moment. Then she started moving again, faster this time, her mind already 3 steps ahead, her hands already steady. The part of her that she had spent almost 3 years burying in locker rooms and double shifts and quiet self-erasure surfacing now with the calm, flat clarity of something that had never actually gone away. It had just been waiting. The supply corridor connected to the hospital's central utility spine, a long, low-ceiling passage that ran the building's length like a hidden nervous system. Cara knew it existed because she had once spent 20 minutes down here looking for a replacement infusion pump that maintenance swore they'd restocked. She had found the pump. She had also found that the corridor was a maze that most staff avoided because it was confusing and loud with the constant mechanical noise of HVAC systems and electrical conduit. Right now, that noise was an advantage. She moved Garrett through it with one hand on the IV pole and one hand near his side. Not touching, but ready, monitoring his gait the way she'd learned to monitor things, constantly, peripherally, without making it obvious. He was holding up better than he should have been. That bothered her slightly, the same way any outlier bothered her. People in his condition didn't move this well unless something in their training had recalibrated what pain response looked like, which meant he was probably hurting more than he was showing, which meant she needed to watch him more carefully, not less. "Storage room," she said quietly. "End of this corridor, second left. It's not on the main floor plan." "How do you know that?" "Infusion pump." He didn't ask her to explain. She appreciated that. The storage room was exactly where she remembered it. A heavy door marked biomedical equip/no patient access that was perpetually ignored by everyone except the biomed tech who came through twice a month. She tried the handle. Unlocked, because of course in a grid failure the card reader was dead. She pushed it open. Inside, shelving units, equipment cases, the particular smell of rubber and mineral oil and old cardboard. One narrow window near the ceiling, ground level outside, letting in the minimal ambient light of the hospital parking structure. She got Garrett to the wall farthest from the door and eased him down to sitting. He didn't protest, which told her he needed it. She hung the IV bag on a shelf bracket and checked the drip rate by feel, still running. She pulled the portable SAT monitor from her pocket. She'd grabbed it automatically when they left the trauma bay, one of those reflexes she hadn't known she still had, and clipped it back on his finger, 94%. Pulse 98. Down from 112 when they'd left the bay. "You're stabilizing," she said. "Told you I could walk." "You could walk. Doesn't mean you should." She sat back on her heels and looked at him directly for the first time with actual light, even the dim gray kind coming through the ground-level window. He was mid-30s, as the paramedic had said. Square jaw, the kind of face that looked like it had been through things and hadn't quite recovered its original shape. a scar running through the left eyebrow that was old enough to be faded. He looked like someone who had spent a long time being useful in conditions that didn't make the news. "Halcyon," she said. "Tell me what happened." He was quiet for a moment, not stalling. She could tell the difference between someone constructing a lie and someone deciding how much truth to give. He was doing the latter. "You know what the unit was," he said finally. "Forward recon, black budget. No command signature above a certain pay grade." She paused. "I treated 4 of yours once. I was never told their names." "Valdez, Huang, Sorrento, and Briggs," he said. "Outside Cotan, 2019. She said nothing, but something shifted in her chest. She had thought about those 4 men occasionally in the years since. Whether they'd made it, whether anyone had. "I was the 5th, Garrett said. "I was on the extraction vehicle when the contact happened. I wasn't hit. And now you're here." "Now I'm here." He looked at the window. "The unit was deactivated 8 months ago. Official story is budget reallocation. Real story is that 2 of our operations were sold. Not compromised, sold. Someone in the contractor pipeline was moving mission data to private buyers. We lost people because of it." Cara kept her expression neutral. "How many?" "Officially, none. We don't exist, remember?" His voice was flat, not bitter. He'd passed through bitter and come out somewhere quieter on the other side. "I've been building a file for 6 months. Financial records, communication intercepts, identity documentation, enough to name the specific individuals who facilitated the transactions." "Where's the file?" He tapped his chest. "Left side, below the entry wounds." She stared at him. "It's not physical," he said. "Encrypted data. Drive embedded behind the sternum plate of a vest I was wearing when they hit me. The vest is... I don't know where the vest is. They may have it. Or the paramedics cut it off in the field." A pause. "Yeah, that's possible." "What was the vest look like?" "Standard plate carrier, gray, no markings. There was a panel on the inside left behind the ceramic, sealed with military-grade epoxy. They wouldn't have known what it was. So it might be in the trauma bay," she said, "or evidence storage, or the paramedic unit. Or whoever did this already has it." They sat with that for a moment. From above them, through the floor, she could hear movement. Not running, controlled. The kind of systematic sweep that someone ran when they had a floor plan and a purpose. She glanced at the ceiling. "They're on the main floor," she said. "How many did you count?" 3 in the maintenance disguise. There may be more outside." "There are more outside." He said it with the certainty of someone who knew how these operations were staffed. "Minimum 6 for a containment like this. Probably 8. 2 on exits, 2 on vehicle, 4 inside." "You've run this type of op." "I've run this type of op." She looked at him. "Then you know they're not going to stop at searching the floor. When they don't find you in the trauma bay, they expand the search radius systematically, and they do it fast because every minute they're inside a hospital is a minute closer to someone noticing." "How long do we have?" "Minutes," she said. "Maybe 10. She stood up and started moving around the storage room, pulling inventory with her eyes. An equipment case with a broken latch, a box of surgical drain tubing, 3 portable cardiac monitors, outdated models, stripped for parts, a rack of supply boxes with a contents label that she read quickly in the dim light. She pulled one box, sterile wrap, 4x4 gauze, surgical tape, and set it on the nearest flat surface. "I need to check the wounds," she said. "We don't have time. We have 7 minutes. I need 2 of them." She was already pulling supplies. "If one of those entry points is bleeding internally in a way we haven't caught, you fall down in the middle of wherever we're going next, and we're done regardless. So sit still." He was quiet. She lifted his gown and looked. The decompression site was clean. The needle had relieved the tension pneumothorax and the pressure was staying down, which meant the underlying injury wasn't as catastrophic as it could have been. The other 2 entry wounds were packed from the field intervention, both tracking obliquely through soft tissue rather than vitals, which was either extraordinary luck or extremely poor marksmanship, neither of which she'd mention. She pressed gently around the lower wound. He didn't flinch. She pressed harder. Still nothing. "You're either in shock or your pain threshold is genuinely ridiculous," she said. "Little of both, probably." She retaped the packing, firmer this time, and stepped back. The decompression is holding. You've got internal bleeding somewhere, but it's not acute. If it were, you'd already be in trouble. We need to get you to actual OR level care within a few hours, or that changes. Are we clear on that? Clear. I'm not negotiating with you on that timeline. I said clear, Dillon. She dropped the used supplies in the corner and looked at the door. There's a fire exit at the end of the utility corridor. It connects to the parking structure on the east side of the building. If they have exits covered, they have the main exits covered. The utility fire exit comes out behind the mechanical equipment. It's not on the public floor plan. She looked at him. It's also not where I'm suggesting we go. I'm suggesting we go back up. He looked at her. Back up, he repeated. The people looking for you expect you to be trying to get out of the building, and you're in no condition to run a parking structure in the dark. But if we go back to the main floor... She paused, working through it. I know this building. I know where the sight lines are. I know which corridors bottleneck. I know where the security desk keeps the manual protocols. And more importantly, I know that in about 4 minutes, the nursing staff is going to realize they've got a critical patient missing from the trauma bay. And when they raise the alarm, this building gets complicated for everyone, including them. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. You're going to use the alarm as cover, he said. I'm going to use the alarm as cover. Another pause. Okay. Can you stand? Already did it once. She helped him up anyway. They came back through the utility corridor in the opposite direction, moving faster this time because they had to. Garrett managed the IV pole one-handed and kept pace better than she expected, though she could hear the effort in his breathing. Controlled, measured, the kind of breathing that was being deliberately managed rather than occurring naturally. She stopped him at the corridor junction. Listen, she said. They both went still. Above them, she could hear the beginning of it, the rising pitch of voices from the main floor. Not panic yet. Confusion. The specific auditory signature of people looking for something that should be there and wasn't. And then cleaner and sharper, cutting through the general noise, Jamie's voice, at a volume Jamie almost never used. Where is he? Somebody tell me where the patient from Trauma 1 went. Trauma 2, another voice corrected. I don't care which one. He's not there. Where is he? Maybe Hartman moved him. Hartman is in surgery. He didn't move anyone. Someone get me security. Cara timed it. She gave it 45 seconds for the confusion to peak, for staff attention to be pulled toward the trauma wing, for the maintenance disguise search team to recalibrate toward the internal alarm rather than methodical sweep. Then she pulled open the stairwell door at the corridor end, got Garrett up 2 flights to the 3rd floor. Slowly, painfully slowly, him gripping the rail with one hand and the pole with the other, her behind him counting his breaths, and came out into the surgical prep corridor. 3rd floor was quieter. Backup power was better up here because it was adjacent to the OR suite. The lights were at maybe 60% of normal, which felt almost bright after the ground floor darkness. She pushed him into a recessed doorway, supply access, staff only, and pressed the door shut behind them. He was breathing harder now. She checked the SAT monitor without making a production of it, 92%, down 2 points from the climb. Give me a minute, he said. She gave him 90 seconds, then said, We need a working phone. The cell network might be up even if the landlines are down. My phone's gone. They took it in the parking structure. She checked her own. 3 bars, emergency calls only. Whatever they'd done to the grid had also interfered with the local cell infrastructure. She tried to call out anyway. The call connected for 2 seconds and then dropped. She tried a text instead. It wouldn't send. The spinning indicator just sat there. Okay, she said. Different plan. There's a charge nurse station at the end of this corridor that has a hardwired emergency line. It's not on the main hospital system. It goes direct to county dispatch. It's there for OR emergencies if the main communications go down. You know a lot about the infrastructure of this building. I cover a lot of shifts. She peered around the doorframe. The corridor was clear. If I can get to that line, I can reach someone. Who? The police? I was thinking more specific than that. He looked at her. The people who know about Halcyon aren't going to be reachable through normal channels, he said. It wasn't a challenge. It was information offered carefully. I know that, she said, but I know a number that isn't a normal channel. Another pause. He was reading her the way she imagined he read situations professionally. What number? After you got out of that base outside Khotan, the officer who did my debrief gave me a contact number. He said it was for emergencies only, and that I'd know an emergency when I was in one. She looked at the corridor again. I think this qualifies. You remember the number? She tapped her temple. I remember things I'm told to forget. It's a problem I've had since childhood. She didn't wait for his response. She moved down the corridor in the low light, staying close to the wall, checking the charge station from 10 feet away before she crossed to it. No one in sight. She went to the hardwired console, an older unit, beige plastic, the kind of landline that hadn't been updated since the hospital's last major renovation because no one thought about the backup systems until they needed them. She picked it up. Dial tone. She exhaled. She dialed from memory, the way she'd rehearsed it in her head occasionally, the way you rehearse evacuation routes, not because you expect to use them, but because not knowing the route is a specific kind of carelessness she didn't allow herself. It rang 3 times. A voice answered. Male, flat, completely devoid of the standard greeting you'd expect from any number at this hour. Just go. This is Cara Dillon. I was attached to the 312th Medical Evacuation Unit out of Fort Callum as a contracted specialist. I treated 4 members of Halcyon in 2019. Post-debrief was conducted by I never got his name. He had a scar on his left hand. I have one of yours. He's alive and he's here, and so are the people who tried to make sure he wasn't. Silence on the line for approximately 5 seconds. Not disconnection. Processing. Then, location. Mercy Hollow Regional Medical Center, Duskfield, Colorado, 3rd floor surgical corridor, East Wing. Copy. Do not move him. Do not engage further. Are you armed? No. Do you need to be? She thought about the 3 people in maintenance uniforms moving through the trauma floor. She thought about Garrett's breathing. She thought about the fact that she had managed to keep a critically injured man alive for the last 45 minutes using a portable sat monitor, a needle, and a supply corridor she'd found by accident looking for an infusion pump. I'll manage, she said. We'll have eyes on your location in... A pause. The voice consulted something. 22 minutes. That's a long time. It's what we have. Hold position. The line went quiet without a formal goodbye. She set the receiver back in the cradle. 22 minutes. She walked back to where she'd left Garrett, and he read her face before she could speak. How long? He asked. 22 minutes. He nodded once. Like it was acceptable. Like 22 minutes in a hospital with active hostile operatives was a reasonable number he could work with. She suspected this was not the longest he had ever held a position. All right, she said. We need to stay on this floor, but we can't stay in this doorway. If they sweep up from the ground floor... She heard the stairwell door at the far end of the corridor open. Not the one they'd come through. The other one. She grabbed Garrett's arm and pulled him back against the wall, pressing them both into the recessed doorway as footsteps came down the corridor. One set. Moving with that same terrible purpose she'd heard in the trauma bay, that specific absence of the normal navigational hesitation that ordinary people have in unfamiliar spaces. Whoever was coming knew this floor, or had a layout. She looked at Garrett. He was already looking at the door behind them, the supply access door which she had pulled mostly shut. He reached back and tried the handle. Locked. The keycard reader beside it had a faint red glow, which meant this particular lock had stayed on standard power. She pulled her badge from her scrub pocket. The hospital card was an electronic fob. It worked on standard reader locks regardless of the grid failure, on a separate low-voltage backup. She swiped it. The reader went green. She pulled the door open. They slid inside. Through the small gap she held at the door's edge, she watched the figure come down the corridor. Maintenance uniform. Compact, with the particular way of moving that told her this was someone with significant tactical training who was just barely performing the maintenance cover. He was holding something at his right side that wasn't a tool. He stopped near the charge station. She watched him look at the phone. He reached out and checked the handset. Maybe checking for warmth, maybe checking the last dialed indicator if the unit had one. Old models sometimes did. She didn't breathe. He set the handset down, looked at the corridor, moved on. She let the door close another centimeter until the gap was almost nothing. "He's going to find us," Garrett said, barely a sound. "Not yet." She counted seconds, watched through the gap until the figure had moved beyond her sight line. "He doesn't know which room we're in, and he can't open staff access doors without a badge. He'll do a visual sweep of the corridor and move on to the next floor. Or he'll call for backup. If he calls for backup, we'll hear comms. Do you have a radio on them?" He thought about it. "Probably. Earpiece, encrypted short range. Then we won't hear anything, but we'll see the response." She turned to look at the supply room properly. Full shelving, medical supplies in quantity, and in the back corner, an intercom unit, one of the older wall-mounted intercoms from when this floor was a general surgical ward before the renovation. Long disabled. She crossed to it and looked at the wiring behind the unit. The primary lines were dead, but there was a secondary wire, she traced it with her fingers, that ran to the OR suite intercom circuit, which was on independent emergency power. "I need something to strip wire," she said. "What are you doing?" "The OR suite intercom is on its own power loop. If I can bridge this unit to that circuit, I can reach the OR desk." She looked around the shelving. "I need a blade, a pair of scissors, anything sharp enough to strip insulation." Garrett reached into his boot. She stared as he produced a folding knife. Compact, matte finish, the kind of thing you carried because you always carried it, because the day you didn't was the day you needed it. "I've had it since the parking structure," he said. "They didn't pat me down before the ambulance arrived." She took the knife, opened it, and started working on the insulation. Her hands were steady. She noticed this in an abstract way, the way you notice things about yourself when you're operating in a mode that sets aside the noise of normal consciousness. In her regular life, in the Cara Dillon who covered extra shifts and deflected condescension from directors and went home to a one-bedroom apartment with a dead plant she kept forgetting to replace. Her hands sometimes shook after hard cases. Sometimes she sat in the car in the parking structure for 10 minutes before she could drive. She was not someone who had her anxiety sorted out. She was, in fact, quite bad at being fine. Right now, her hands didn't shake. She stripped the wire with 2 clean cuts and touched the exposed ends to the OR circuit terminals. Static. Then the soft double click of an active intercom circuit. She pressed the call button. "OR desk. Is anyone at the OR desk?" A pause. Then a woman's voice, startled. Who is this? This line hasn't worked in..." "I know. I'm Cara Dillon, ER nurse. 3rd floor East Supply Room. I need you to listen to me without asking too many questions. There are people in this building who are not hospital staff. They came in through the service entrance during the power failure. They are looking for a patient, and I have that patient. I need you to quietly, without alerting anyone at the main nursing desk, call Duskfield Police Direct Dispatch, not 911, the direct line, and report an intruder event." Silence. Then, "Are you serious?" "I wouldn't have bridged a dead intercom circuit if I wasn't serious." Another pause. "There's a man here in the OR with us," the OR desk nurse said, and her voice had shifted, dropped lower. "He said he was from facilities. He came in about 15 minutes ago. He's been standing near the door." Cara looked at Garrett. He had heard it. The man at the OR desk was not from facilities. They had put someone on the surgical floor before the grid went down, which meant this was not an improvised response to Garrett's presence in the ER. This had been planned before he arrived, which meant they had known he was coming, which meant someone inside had told them. "Lock the OR internal door," Cara said. "Do not let him out. Can you do that?" The OR desk nurse's voice was shaking. "I think so. The manual lock, yes. Do it now, and call that number." She released the intercom button, turned to Garrett. His face was doing the same controlled neutral thing it did when he was processing, but his eyes had something behind them now, something harder and older. "Someone in this hospital knew I'd be coming here," he said. "Or they knew you'd come to an ER in Duskfield if you were hit. If they knew your fallback procedures, nobody knows my fallback procedures. Then someone knew your approximate location and put assets in position at every major ER in the area." She looked at him. How many hospitals are there in Duskfield? 2. This one in Crestview on the north side. Then they split the team, half here, half there, waiting. He was quiet. She checked the sat monitor, 91%, still holding, barely. He needed real intervention within the next 2 hours, or the internal bleeding she suspected would become internal bleeding she couldn't manage. 18 minutes, she said, checking the time. 17 and a half, he corrected, because apparently he'd been counting from the moment she'd made the call. She almost said something about that, then didn't. She sat down on the floor of the supply room with her back against the shelving, facing the door, and listened. The building had its own language. She'd learned it over 3 years. And right now it was telling her that the ground floor was actively chaotic, staff moving in unusual patterns, the specific sound of raised voices that meant an announcement was coming or had already come. Somewhere above them, she thought she could hear sirens. External, getting closer. Police might be responding to the OR call, she said, or they're being staged. Garrett had also lowered himself to sitting, his back to the opposite shelf. The knife was back in his boot. He looked exhausted in a way that was different from his earlier managed exhaustion. He was getting closer to the edge of what willpower could compensate for. You should stay still, she said. I'm sitting on a supply room floor. You should stay still and not talk. You want to tell me why you did it? He said. She looked at him. Any of it, he said. You were clocked out. You were 2 minutes from the exit. You could have gone home, filed an incident report, and had zero connection to any of this. She thought about Director Renwick's voice. You don't have standing. She thought about Jamie's careful avoidance of eye contact. She thought about Hartman's sudden interest in the monitor screen. She thought about 19 hours and 40 minutes and the way it had ended. The wounds, she said finally. I saw the wounds and I recognized them, and I couldn't make myself not know what I was looking at. She paused. I've been trying to do that for 3 years. Not know things, not see things. Be a regular ER nurse who does regular ER nursing and goes home at a regular hour. A beat. Turns out, I'm not particularly good at it. Garrett said nothing. From somewhere in the building, not the floor above, not the floor below, but this floor, close, she heard a door, and then footsteps. More than one person this time. She was on her feet before she'd made a conscious choice about it. She pressed her eye to the gap of the supply room door. 2 figures now, moving together down the corridor from the direction of the OR suite. One in the maintenance uniform, one in street clothes, dark jacket, unremarkable, the kind of nothing clothing that was chosen specifically to be nothing. They were moving quickly, not running, but not searching anymore. They were moving like they knew where they were going. She looked back at Garrett. He was up. She hadn't heard him stand. They made us, she said quietly. OR desk, he said. The man inside heard the intercom call. Of course. She'd been talking on an open circuit, loud enough for the OR desk nurse to hear her, and loud enough for the man standing at the OR suite door to hear her voice through the wall. She scanned the room. Shelving, equipment, one door, no windows. The footsteps stopped outside. A beat of silence. Then a voice, not loud, but close. We know you're in there. I need you to come out. Nobody here is going to get hurt. Cara stood in the dim supply room with her back straight and her jaw tight, looking at the door between her and that voice, and she thought about what she had and didn't have. She had a patient who needed surgery. She had a dead intercom and a knife she'd already returned. She had 14 minutes until someone who had answered a phone at 2 a.m. showed up to a hospital in Colorado, and she had absolutely no guarantee of what state things would be in when they arrived. She also had 3 years of being told she didn't have standing. She looked at Garrett. He was watching her with an expression that was waiting, not desperate. The expression of a soldier who has identified the decision point and is waiting to see how the person in command calls it. And that, more than anything else, was what straightened her spine. She put her hand flat on the door. Last chance, the voice outside said. She said quietly to Garrett, get against the back wall, left side. Don't move until I tell you. He moved. She took a breath, and she opened the door. The 2 figures were directly in front of her. The maintenance uniform one on the left, the street clothes one on the right, and they had one clear tactical advantage over her, which was that they were expecting her to be afraid, because she was a nurse who had been hiding in a supply room. What they were not expecting was for her to step fully into the corridor and pull the door shut behind her, cutting off Garrett's location as a reference point, and then stand there with her hands at her sides and her expression completely calm, and look at them the way she had learned to look at very bad situations from very close range. "My patient needs surgery," she said, "and I have about 13 minutes before this building becomes extremely complicated for everyone who doesn't belong here. I'd encourage you to use that time productively." The man in the maintenance uniform reached toward his left side, and that was when the east stairwell door exploded open. Not from below. From the roof access above. The first figure through the door was wearing tactical gear with no visible insignia, moving with the specific controlled aggression of someone breaching a space on purpose and with training, and behind that figure were three more, and the corridor filled very quickly with the kind of presence that changed the geometry of every other person in it. The man in the maintenance uniform froze. The voice that cut through the corridor came from behind Cara, from the figure now positioned at her left shoulder, close enough that she could hear the radio traffic through the earpiece, close enough that when the figure spoke, she recognized it was directed entirely at the two men in front of her. "Federal authority, hands where I can see them. Do not make this a problem." The maintenance uniform man dropped his hand away from his left side. The street clothes man raised both hands, and in the ringing silence that followed, with the corridor secured and the sound of more boots on the stairs, and the distant sound of sirens that were finally arriving at the hospital's main entrance, the figure at Cara's shoulder turned to look at her. Dark tactical vest, no insignia, a face she had never seen before, and also, somehow, a face that made sense to look at here, in this context, at this hour. "Medic Dillon," the figure said, and Cara's breath left her slowly, because those two words, that combination, her name and the title she'd buried 3 years ago in a locker room, just like the one she'd nearly walked out of an hour ago, hit her somewhere she wasn't ready for them to hit. She nodded. "Your patient," the figure said. "Where is he?" She reached back and pushed open the supply room door. Garrett was against the back wall, left side, exactly where she'd told him to be. He looked at the tactical figure in the doorway. The figure looked at him. Something passed between them that Cara didn't have language for. Some specific recognition that existed in a space she had been adjacent to, but never inside. "Sergeant," the figure said. "Major," Garrett said, and then, because he had used up every reserve he had getting through the last 40 minutes, he slid down the wall to sitting, caught himself on one arm, and didn't quite make it look controlled. Cara was already at his side. "Sat monitor," she said to no one in particular. "He needs volume. He needs imaging, and he needs an OR in the next 90 minutes. From the corridor came the sounds of the hospital reasserting itself, more voices, police radios, the specific clatter of an institution suddenly dealing with consequences. The power had not come back on. The backup lighting was still casting everything in that flat emergency amber. The major crouched at Garrett's other side and looked at Cara across him. "You held this position," the major said. "It's what I was told to do. You had no backup, no weapon, and a critical patient." "I had a supply room and a broken intercom," she said. "You work with what you have." The major looked at her for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read in the amber light. It wasn't quite respect. It was something more like the recognition that comes when a category you had filed something under turns out to be the wrong category entirely. But there wasn't time for any of that. Because at the far end of the corridor, visible through the now open stairwell door, she could see Director Paul Renwick standing at the third-floor landing, and he was not looking at the tactical team, not looking at Garrett, not looking at any of the things that should have been commanding his attention. He was looking at Cara, and the expression on his face was not what she expected. It wasn't shock. It wasn't guilt. It was something calculating, something that flickered with options the way a man's face flickers when he's still trying to find a move in a game he should have already conceded. And in the half-second before he turned away, she saw his hand go to his jacket pocket. "Hold him," she said. The major looked up, but Renwick had already turned and was moving back down the stairs, and what Cara had seen in his jacket pocket before it disappeared, the edge of it, The slight rectangular angle she had seen before on people who were attempting to destroy small pieces of evidence quickly was not a phone. Two of the tactical team were already moving before Cara finished the word. She didn't wait to watch them. She turned back to Garrett because Garrett was her immediate problem and Renwick was theirs, and she had learned a long time ago that you had to trust the people on your left and right to handle their quadrant while you handled yours. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse was weaker, not dramatically but measurably, and measurement was everything right now. "He needs volume," she said to the major. "Do your people have a field kit?" "Medics on the way up." "How far?" "1 floor." "Get them here faster." The major said something into the radio on his shoulder, and Cara kept her fingers on Garrett's pulse and counted. His SAT had dropped to 89. The internal bleeding she had suspected was no longer theoretical. It was progressing, slowly, but inevitably, the way these things always progressed when you couldn't get a patient to imaging. "Still here," Garrett said, without opening his eyes. "I can tell," she said. "Stop using energy to reassure me." "You looked worried." "I am worried. That's different from needing you to fix it." The medic came through the stairwell door at a pace that told her someone had communicated urgency properly. Female, compact, moving with the efficiency of someone who had run this scenario in conditions significantly worse than a hospital corridor. She dropped to a knee at Garrett's other side and opened the field kit in the same motion. Cara gave her the rundown in 30 seconds flat. Entry wounds, decompression performed, time elapsed, current SAT, suspected internal bleeding, volume pushed en route. The medic listened without interrupting, confirmed 2 points, and started a second line in Garrett's right forearm before Cara finished her last sentence. "You the one who did the decompression?" the medic asked. "Yes." "Nice placement." "It was either that or watch him die." The medic looked up briefly. "Works too." She pushed fluids. "We need to move him, or is operational." 3rd floor or suite is on independent power. There's a situation in there that should be resolved by now. Cara looked at the major, who was on the radio again. He held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes. She relayed that. 2 minutes and the OR suite is clear. The medic nodded and kept working. Cara stood and gave herself 3 seconds to do what she hadn't allowed herself to do for the last hour, which was feel the full weight of what was happening. The corridor. The amber light. The sound of boots and radio traffic, and somewhere below them, the hospital in controlled chaos. Garrett on the floor with a second IV running and his face pale and his breathing managed and deliberate. She had kept him alive. Against everything, he was still alive. She allowed herself those 3 seconds, and then she was done with them, because the major had moved to her shoulder and his voice had the particular quality of information that was about to require her attention. "Renwick," he said. "He didn't make the exit. We have him at the 2nd floor landing." What was in his pocket? "A data card, small format. He dropped it when my team intercepted him. It's intact." Cara exhaled. "What's on it?" "We don't know yet, but we found something else." The major paused. "His access logs. His card reader history from the last 72 hours. He accessed the ambulance bay, receiving records 4 times in the last 3 days. Specifically, the patient intake routing system." She looked at him. He knew Garrett was coming. He knew someone was coming, someone with a specific injury pattern and no listed next of kin. A pause. "The intake routing system has a flag protocol. Certain patient profiles trigger a silent alert to a designated administrator account. It's designed for VIP patients, litigation risk, press situations." "He modified it," Cara said, "to flag a different kind of patient." "We believe so. The flag was set 8 days ago." 8 days ago, before Garrett was even shot, which meant Renwick hadn't responded to Garrett's arrival. He had been waiting for it, or for someone like him. "Where is he now?" Cara asked. "2nd floor conference room. 2 of mine are with him." "I want to see him." The major looked at her for a moment with the same evaluating expression he'd used earlier. "That's not standard procedure." "I'm not standard anything right now," she said, "and I have information he doesn't know I have." He held her gaze. Then, 5 minutes, after Garrett is transferred to OR prep. She went back to help with the transfer. It took 8 minutes, not 5, because Garrett's pressure dipped during the movement, and they had to stop on the second-floor landing while the medic pushed a bolus and waited for stabilization. Cara held the bag, monitored the line, and counted his respirations while the tactical team stood in the stairwell around them with the patience of people who understood that the body operated on its own timeline regardless of operational urgency. When the pressure came back up, 94 systolic, enough, they moved again. At the OR suite doors, the OR desk nurse was waiting. She was maybe 25, with the red-rimmed eyes of someone who had spent the last 40 minutes in a locked room with a man she was afraid of and was only now allowing herself to show it. She looked at Cara. "The man from facilities," she said. "He's contained," Cara said. "You did exactly right. What's your name?" "Reyes. Sophia Reyes." "You locked the door when I told you to." "I almost didn't," Sophia said. "He was very—" She stopped. He was very calm. That was the worst part. He just stood there and acted like he had every right to be there. "They always do," Cara said. "You did right." She held Sophia's gaze for a second because Sophia needed someone to hold her gaze for a second, and then she handed off Garrett to the OR team and the medic and turned toward the second floor. The conference room was at the end of the administrative corridor, a room she had been in exactly once for a mandatory staff meeting about patient satisfaction scores. Round table, wall-mounted screen, window overlooking the hospital's rear parking area, now populated with police cruisers and 2 unmarked vehicles. Renwick was sitting at the table. He was not restrained. He was sitting in a chair with his jacket on the table in front of him and his hands folded and the specific stillness of a man who had decided that the best available move was stillness. The 2 tactical figures stood at either side of the door and did not acknowledge Cara when she entered. She sat down across from him. He looked at her. His expression had recalibrated from what she had seen in the corridor. The flickering calculation was gone, replaced with something that was trying to be neutral and almost managing it. He looked like a man who had spent 20 years mastering the performance of reasonableness. "Dillon," he said, "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding tonight. You modified the patient intake routing system to flag unidentified trauma patients with no next of kin," she said. 8 days ago, you were waiting." A pause. "Not long enough to be guilt, long enough to be recalculation." "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's a fact. Your access logs confirm it." She kept her voice level. "You used this hospital as a net. You built a procedure into the intake system that would tell you when a certain type of patient arrived so that you could tell other people, and those other people could come in here and finish what they started." She let that sit. "You turned a hospital into a kill site." Something moved across his face. Just briefly. Not remorse. Exposure. The look of something that has been in the dark for a long time suddenly finding itself in light and not having had time to prepare. "You don't understand the scope of what you're involved in," he said quietly. "I understand that a man almost died in your ER tonight because you told someone he was here. That man is carrying information that would—" "I don't care what he's carrying." She leaned forward. "I care that your staff ran toward a building in crisis tonight because that's what they're trained to do, and you used their building against them. I care that Jamie Okafor called a code on a missing patient at 2 a.m. because she thought she'd lost someone. I care about the OR nurse who spent 40 minutes locked in a room being afraid." She paused. "I care about the patient I almost walked away from because you told me I didn't have standing." He looked at her. "That's what you're angry about," he said, and his tone shifted. The particular tone of a man who has found what he thinks is a lever. "This is personal." "It's both," she said. "Things can be both." He started to say something else, and that was when the door opened and a man Cara had not seen before entered the room. Older, in civilian clothes, dark suit, no tie, the kind of unremarkable presentation that represented a very specific category of official. He looked at Renwick, then at Cara, then at the tactical figures at the door. "Director Renwick," he said, "my name is Agent Warren Fitch. I'm with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. I need to advise you that you are being detained in connection with a federal investigation, and that anything you say from this point forward—" Renwick stood up. Fast. The chair scraped back. Both tactical figures moved simultaneously, but Renwick wasn't going anywhere. He was standing because he was the kind of man who couldn't receive this sitting down. He stood and he looked at Cara across the table, and his jaw was tight, and his voice, when he found it, was low and directed entirely at her. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said. "I kept my patient alive," she said. "Everything else is yours." Fitch stepped forward. The tactical figures moved with him, and Renwick, who had told her she didn't have standing, who had dismissed her in front of a room full of people who hadn't said anything, who had built a mechanism of death into the hospital intake system, and then straightened his tie and gone back to his office. Renwick looked at Cara Dillon one more time before the men moved him toward the door, and she looked back. She did not look away first. He was 2 steps from the door when his phone, still in his jacket on the table, lit up with an incoming call. Everyone stopped. The screen was face up. The number on it was not a contact name. It was a number, raw, with a Colorado area code. And beneath the incoming call notification, visible for the 3 seconds before Fitch crossed the room and turned it face down, was a notification from an app she recognized, a secure delete application, triggered remotely. Someone had just tried to wipe Renwick's phone from outside the building. Fitch picked up the phone and looked at it and said something to one of the tactical figures that Cara couldn't hear. The figure moved immediately toward the door, speaking into the radio. Cara was already at the window. The rear parking area was lit by cruiser lights and floodlights from the tactical vehicles, and most of it was visible from here. Most of it. At the far edge of the lot, at the perimeter where the hospital property boundary met the access road, a dark sedan was parked with its lights off. As she watched, it moved, slow at first and then faster, pulling toward the access road's far exit, the one that connected to the service road rather than the main street. The one that the police response hadn't blocked because it wasn't on the standard approach. "There's a vehicle," she said. "Far end, service exit, no lights?" "We see it," the major said from the doorway. He was already on the radio. "All units, dark sedan, service road egress. Intercept now." She watched the car reach the service road and accelerate. For a long moment, in the floodlit dark, it was just a pair of taillights getting smaller. And then, from the direction of the main road, headlights appeared. Multiple. Moving fast toward the service road junction. Not police cruisers. The lights were wrong for that. Too bright and too evenly spaced. The specific light configuration of larger vehicles. The sedan braked, reversed, was blocked on the other side now by one of the unmarked vehicles that had repositioned. It sat in the service road between 2 sets of headlights and did not move. Cara let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like several minutes. Behind her, she heard Renwick's voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just the voice of a man watching a structure he had built for years collapse in a single night. He said, "I want a lawyer." "That's your right," Fitch said. "I want one now." "That's also your right." She turned from the window. The room was full of people doing what needed to be done, and none of them needed her for it. Renwick was being managed. The vehicle outside was contained. Garrett was in surgery prep. The building was not normal, would not be normal for a long time, but was no longer under active threat. She should have felt something clean, resolution, or relief, or the particular satisfaction of something finished. What she felt instead was the specific exhaustion that comes after adrenaline has burned completely through your system and left nothing behind it, and underneath that, something she couldn't immediately name. Not empty, just reconfigured, like a room that had been rearranged in the dark and she was still learning where the furniture was. She walked out of the conference room. The administrative corridor was quiet. The backup lighting hummed. Her shoes made the same echoing sound they always made on hospital tile, the same sound they'd made in the locker room when she'd sat down on that bench an hour and 40 minutes ago. She stopped at the window at the end of the corridor. Outside, the parking lot was full of lights and vehicles and the organized aftermath of intervention. The building was holding. Everyone she could account for was still breathing. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. 1 bar. A text from Jamie sent 12 minutes ago, just getting through. "Where are you? Please respond. We have a situation." She typed back. "I know. I'm on the 2nd floor admin corridor. I'm okay." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "The patient from trauma 2 is alive?" Yes. How? She looked at the text for a moment. I'll explain later, she typed back. How's the chest pain in bed 4? A pause longer than the previous ones. Then, cardiology came down 20 minutes ago, caught a STEMI. He's in the cath lab. Another pause. You flagged him at 9. I know. Cara. Yeah. Who are you? She looked at the text, at the question, which was not really a question, which was Jamie, who had worked beside her for almost 3 years without actually seeing her, finally seeing her. Not the whole picture. Nobody was seeing the whole picture tonight, but the outline of it, the shape of something that didn't fit the category it had been filed in. She started to type an answer, and then the lights came back on. Not the backup amber. The real lights. Full power, fluorescent, flooding the corridor with the harsh, ordinary brightness of a hospital at 4 in the morning, and with it, the sound of systems coming back online. Elevator mechanisms engaging, monitors rebooting, the PA system clicking through its startup tone. And over the PA, in the sudden loud normalcy of a restored hospital, a voice that was not Jamie's voice and not the Major's voice, a voice she didn't recognize, male, controlled, not affiliated with anyone she had spoken to tonight, said, "Attention Mercy Hollow staff. This is a security notification. All personnel are asked to report to their stations immediately. All visitors and non-essential personnel are asked to proceed to the main lobby." Normal language. Standard emergency resolution announcement. Except the voice reading it paused, and in the pause she heard something behind the pause. Not static, not technical noise, but a breath. A controlled breath. The kind of breath you heard from people who were managing their voice deliberately in a specific way she recognized. And then the announcement finished, but the PA didn't click off the way it should have. It stayed open. And from somewhere in the building, from whatever room or station had been used to make the announcement, she heard, faint, barely there, just long enough to be unmistakable, the sound of a door closing. Not the mechanical click of a standard interior door, the heavy pressurized seal of a specific kind of door, the kind found in one location in this building that she knew of. The server room, on the basement level, which meant someone was in the building's central server room right now, and the announcement had been cover, and the power had come back on not because the grid failure had been resolved, but because someone needed the hospital's systems running again. Someone who hadn't been in that sedan. Someone who had stayed inside. She was already moving before she'd made a decision about it. The stairwell at the end of the administrative corridor took her down 2 floors in under 20 seconds, and she came out into the basement level at a near run, which she immediately slowed because running in a hospital basement at 4 in the morning when you didn't know what was in the server room was a good way to make the kind of noise that removed any remaining advantage she had. The basement was different from the floors above. No backup lighting down here. The emergency circuit hadn't reached it, which meant the power restoration had lit the overhead fluorescence at full clinical brightness, and that brightness felt wrong after the amber dark of the last hour. Everything too visible, too exposed. The corridor ran straight from the stairwell to the maintenance wing, with the server room halfway down on the left side behind a door marked Network Infrastructure / Authorized Access Only. The door was closed. She stopped 10 feet from it and listened. Nothing from inside. No movement. No sound. Nothing that would tell her if someone was still in there or had already finished whatever they came to do and gone. The PA announcement had bought maybe 90 seconds of cover, long enough to do something specific, not long enough to do something comprehensive. She pulled out her phone. 1 bar, still. She typed fast to the Major, server room basement level, someone inside during announcement, may have accessed hospital systems. The response came back in under 15 seconds. Hold position, do not engage. She looked at the door. She looked at the text. Then she swiped her badge across the reader. The lock disengaged. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, staying to the side of the frame, not presenting herself as a target in the doorway. Old habit. The kind that apparently never actually left regardless of how many years you spent trying to be a different kind of person. The server room was empty, or appeared to be. 2 rows of rack-mounted servers down the center, floor to ceiling, with the constant noise of cooling fans that she'd heard through the door and mistaken for silence. The room was maybe 40 feet long and lit by the blue-white status lights of active equipment on top of the fluorescents overhead. Cold. Server rooms always ran cold. The smell of electronics and processed air. She moved along the first rack, checking the gaps between units. At the far end of the second row, she found what she was looking for. Not a person. A device. Small, matte black, approximately the size of a deck of cards, clipped to the back of a rack unit with a magnetic mount and connected to the hospital's main network switch via a cable that had been pulled from one port and replaced with the device's own connection. A small LED on the device blinked green in a slow, steady rhythm. She knew what it was. Not from nursing school. From a briefing she had attended in a room with no windows, given by a man who explained in very flat language what hostile network intrusion looked like at the hardware level. It was a persistent access device. Once connected to the network, it created a backdoor that survived system resets, power cycles, and standard security scans. Whoever had placed it was not trying to access the hospital's systems tonight. They had already accessed them. They were building a way back in. She took a photo with her phone, then she did not touch it, because removing it incorrectly would trigger whatever data destruction protocol was built into the device, and the data on it was almost certainly more valuable intact than gone. She backed out of the server room, kept the door held open with her foot, and called the major's direct line instead of texting. He picked up on the first ring. "Server room," she said. "Far end of the second rack row. Network access device. Mag-mounted. Currently active. Green indicator. It needs a forensic extraction. If you pull it wrong, it'll wipe." She paused. "Whoever put it there is gone, but they were here during the announcement. They used the PA as cover." A beat of silence that meant he was processing and redirecting simultaneously. "How long ago?" 4 or 5 minutes. The announcement ran about that long. "Building exits are covered. If they're still inside, they may not need an exit," she said. "If the device is already running, the person who placed it has what they need. They might not care about leaving quickly." Another pause. "Stay on the line," he said. She stayed on the line. While she waited, she looked around the server room from the doorway. The cooling fans ran their constant white noise. The status lights blinked their silent code. Somewhere in this rack was the hospital's patient record system, the intake routing system, the access logs that had already started to tell a story about Renwick. And somewhere in whatever the black device had already copied, there was probably more. Data that would either confirm the picture or complicate it. She had learned to distrust clean pictures. The major came back. "We're pulling the building's internal camera footage for the last 20 minutes, the camera nearest the basement server room." He stopped. "What?" she said. "The camera nearest the server room has a 7-minute gap in the footage, starting approximately 40 minutes before the power restoration." 40 minutes before. Not during the blackout. The camera had been selectively disabled before the power came back, which meant someone had access to the camera management system before they restored the grid, which meant the power restoration itself had been the final step in a sequence, not the beginning of one. She looked at the blinking green light on the device at the end of the rack. "This was always the objective," she said, slowly working through it. Garrett was part of it, but not the main part. The main part was the building's systems, the patient flag, the intake routing modification, the network device. They wanted access to the hospital's data infrastructure. The question is why? "The hospital interfaces with 3 county health systems," the major said, and his voice had the quality of someone who was thinking out loud against their own preference for operational silence. "Duskfield County, 2 adjacent. Patient records, insurance data, pharmaceutical procurement, she said. A pause. "Garrett's file," she said. "The evidence he was carrying, you said it was financial records and communication intercepts. You said it named individuals involved in contractor pipeline data sales." "Correct." "Did it include pharmaceutical supply chain data?" The pause this time was longer. "I don't have full visibility into the file contents. That determination is above my—" "Because if it does," she said, "then this hospital isn't just a place they used to get to Garrett. This hospital is connected to the operation. The procurement system, the supply chain. Someone has been using this hospital as a node in something larger. And the device in the server room isn't a back door for future access. She looked at it. It's a data extraction. They came to pull records that would tell them what Garrett's file already knows, so they could destroy the originals before the investigation reaches them. The fan noise ran steady and cold around her. "Fitch," she said, "the DCIS agent. You need to get him down here now, before anyone else touches anything in this system." "Already moving," the major said. "Do not touch the device. Do not leave the room." She stayed. She was getting very tired of being told to stay in rooms. Fitch arrived in 4 minutes with a forensic technician she hadn't seen before. Young, carrying a case that looked like a camera bag but wasn't, moving with the specific haste of someone who had been briefed on the way down and was already thinking 2 steps ahead. Cara stepped aside and let them work. The extraction took 11 minutes. She watched from the doorway, not because she needed to, but because she had nothing else to do, and she was not ready to go back upstairs and sit with her own thoughts. When Fitch finally turned to her, his face had the flat, controlled expression of someone who had just confirmed something they hadn't quite let themselves believe until this moment. "The device had been running for approximately 50 minutes before you found it," he said. "It pulled records going back 14 months. Patient intake data, procurement invoices, pharmaceutical transfer manifests." He paused. "And personnel access logs." "Whose?" Fitch looked at her steadily. "Primarily Renwick's, but also 2 members of the Pharmacy Oversight Committee and 1 person in the hospital's external contracting department." He paused again. "And Dr. Elliot Hartman." She heard the name and said nothing. Hartman, who had arrived after her, claimed the procedure, documented it under his credentials, and then developed a sudden interest in his monitor screen when Renwick dismissed her. Hartman, who had been in the building all night, running the MVA case, authoritative and untouched, and never where the chaos was. "He's still here?" she said. "He's in surgery," Fitch said. "Has been for the last hour and a half. The MVA patient required a procedure." She thought about that. A man whose name was on 14 months of compromised procurement records, currently in a surgical suite with a patient, surrounded by staff who had no idea. "The MVA patient," she said. "Is the procedure routine at this point?" "I don't know the clinical details." "Find out," she said. "Right now." She didn't wait for his response. She pulled up the hospital directory on her phone, the internal version, still partially accessible through the staff app, and found the OR suite listing. She called the OR desk. Sophia answered. She sounded steadier than an hour ago, which was a credit to her. "Sophia, it's Dillon. I need you to tell me the status of the procedure in OER1. "The MVA? They're closing. Should be done in about 15 minutes. "Who scrubbed in with Dr. Hartman?" Nurse practitioner Delgado and the resident, Dr. Park." "Is the patient stable?" "From what I heard, yes. It went well." Cara exhaled. "Okay, 15 minutes. The patient was stable." She had 15 minutes before Hartman finished the procedure, removed his gloves, walked out of the OR suite, and potentially realized that the building had changed around him in ways he hadn't accounted for. She went back upstairs. The second-floor administrative corridor was significantly more populated than when she had left it. 2 uniformed police officers she hadn't seen before. Fitch's colleague from the DCIS talking to the major near the conference room door. And at the end of the corridor, standing with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and the expression of a man who had arrived late to an event that had already been decided without him, Deputy Chief Gareth Sola of the Duskfield Police Department, who outranked everyone in the building on paper and was currently working out exactly how little that paper meant tonight. She walked to the major. "Hartman," she said quietly. "He's on the records. He's finishing a procedure in 15 minutes. What's the plan?" "Fitch is coordinating with Sola. Sola just got here. He doesn't have the context. By the time they coordinate, Hartman is scrubbed out and in the hallway, and—" She stopped. "He's not going to run. That's not how he operates. He's going to be calm. He's going to have a story. He's going to act exactly as confused and concerned as the situation requires, and then he's going to ask for counsel and say nothing. And this building is full of people who have watched him be impressive for years and who will find it very hard to believe, Dillon. I'm saying it has to be clear. When he comes out of that OR, It has to be already clear, not developing, not emerging, done. Or he performs his way out of the immediate moment and it gets harder. The major looked at her. He was quiet for a moment that she didn't try to fill. "What do you suggest?" he said. "The access logs," she said. "His card reader history, his procurement sign-offs, whatever the device pulled. Can your forensic tech give you a summary in 10 minutes? Something specific, something that can't be performed away from, not an accusation, a documented fact." He looked at Fitch's colleague, who had been listening. The colleague nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the stairwell. Cara looked at the clock on the corridor wall. 12 minutes. What happened next was not cinematic. It was not fast or clean or satisfying in the way things sometimes looked from the outside. It was 11 minutes of a forensic technician in a basement pulling specific line items from a device extraction, while two federal agents stood over the technician and made decisions about what was evidentiary and what was actionable. It was a deputy police chief being briefed in condensed, tense language by a major who spoke in facts and did not use more words than necessary. It was Cara standing in the corridor outside the second-floor conference room, too tired to sit and too wired to stand still, eating a granola bar she'd found in her jacket pocket from approximately 3 days ago and watching the clock. At the 12-minute mark, Sola's radio crackled. The OR desk, reporting that Dr. Hartman had completed the procedure. At 13 minutes, Fitch came up the stairs with a printed single page. The forensic tech had found a printer somewhere, which felt like a minor miracle, and handed it to Sola. At 14 minutes, Sola read it, looked at Fitch, and said, "Okay." At 15 minutes, the OR suite doors opened. Hartman came out still in his surgical cap, mask pulled down around his neck, moving with the measured aftermath energy of a completed procedure. Not relaxed, because surgeons were never fully relaxed post-op, but the particular settled quality of a technical task successfully concluded. He was talking to the resident doctor, Park, about something, a half-sentence about closure technique, the automatic debrief. He saw the group at the end of the corridor and stopped talking. The resident noticed the stop and looked up and immediately went very still, in the way young doctors go still when they recognize that something is happening that is above their rank to interpret. Sola stepped forward. He had the page in his hand and his badge visible, and the particular posture of someone who was not going to enjoy this, but was going to do it correctly. "Dr. Hartman," he said, "I need a moment." Hartman looked at Sola, then at Fitch, then at the major. His gaze moved through the assembled group with the efficiency of someone assessing a situation, and Cara watched him do it, watched the read happening behind his eyes, watched him calculate, and then he looked at her. She was the last person his gaze reached, and the longest it stayed. Because she was the variable. Everyone else in the corridor had official standing, badges, credentials, authority that fit a legible category. She was in scrubs with a granola bar wrapper in her left hand, standing at the edge of the group, and he was trying to understand what she was doing there. "Nurse Dillon," he said, not cold, careful. "You're still here." "Patient needed monitoring," she said. "The trauma patient?" A performance of professional concern. "Is he in surgery?" the major said, cutting it off cleanly. "Dr. Hartman, we have documentation connecting your hospital access credentials to pharmaceutical procurement modifications over a 14-month period. We'd like to discuss those records with you." Hartman looked at Sola. "What documentation?" 14 months of supply chain invoices countersigned by your credentials, covering 3 categories of controlled pharmaceutical procurement. The vendor IDs on those invoices don't match any registered supplier in the state database. Sola glanced at the page. The total value of the transactions is approximately $2.3 million. The corridor was quiet. Hartman's face did not collapse. She had half expected it to, and it didn't. He was very good. He processed this with the controlled expression of a man who had practiced this face, who had known, somewhere in the back of his operating mind, that this conversation was eventually possible, and had prepared for it. "That's a very serious allegation," he said. "I'll need to see the specific documentation before I can speak to any of it, and I'll need to call my attorney." "That's your right," Sola said. "Then I'd like to do that now." "Of course." And that was it in terms of drama. No confession, no eruption. He was going to be quiet and careful and manage this through legal representation, and the case would be built from records and not from anything he gave them voluntarily, which was his right, which was also going to be thoroughly insufficient given what was in the device extraction and what was in Garrett's file and what the 14 months of documented transactions would show when someone with forensic accounting credentials spent the necessary time with them. She knew this. She watched him be guided down the corridor toward the conference room, and she knew that calm did not mean escape. Calm meant delay, and delay was not what she'd wanted, but it was what the law provided, and the law was supposed to provide it. What she hadn't expected was that Dr. Park was still standing in the OR corridor doorway. The resident was 20-something, with the unformed quality of someone still becoming what they were going to be. And he was watching Hartman's back as the doctor walked away, and the expression on his face was not shock, it was recognition. Cara walked to him. "Dr. Park." He looked at her. He had a long-fingered, careful kind of face. He looked like someone who was deciding something. "He made me co-sign an invoice," Park said. It came out quiet and fast, like something that had been under pressure. 3 months ago. He said it was a formulary update, a standard procurement authorization. He said the secondary signature was a new compliance requirement. A pause. "I didn't question it. He's Dr. Hartman. I didn't question it." Cara looked at him steadily. "Did you keep a copy?" He blinked. Yes. I photograph every document I sign, for my own records. I've done it since residency started because I was told to by a senior resident who said never sign anything in a hospital without keeping your own copy." Good senior resident. "Is the photo on your phone?" "Yes." "I need you to walk to that man right there." She indicated Fitch. "And show him what you have, right now, before you talk to anyone else." Park looked at Fitch, looked at her. "He came after me a week later," Park said. "Hartman. He said the invoice had been voided, administrative error, forget I signed it. He seemed casual about it, but he made sure I knew he remembered I had signed it. He was establishing mutual exposure," she said, "making you feel like you were part of it so you'd stay quiet." Park's jaw tightened. "Go," she said, "right now." He went. She watched Fitch look up as the resident approached. She watched Park unlock his phone and show the screen. She watched Fitch's expression shift. Just slightly, just enough. In the way a case shifts when it acquires one more piece that changes the geometry of everything connected to it. She leaned her back against the corridor wall. 23 hours since she'd started her shift. Somewhere in that time, she had eaten half a granola bar and done a needle decompression and moved a critically injured man through a building in the dark and called a number she'd memorized 3 years ago and found a network intrusion device in a server room and stood across a table from her director while federal agents processed him. And now she was watching a 20-something resident hand the case another piece of the foundation it would be built on. Her feet hurt. Both of them, specifically the left arch, which always gave out first. She was thinking about this, about her left arch, and whether the locker room bench was still available or had been commandeered for something operational, when Fitch left Park and crossed the corridor to her. "The invoice photo," he said. "It has a vendor ID on it that Park says Hartman told him to ignore. That vendor ID matches one of the IDs on the device extraction." "I know," she said. "There's something else on the photo." He paused. "It's a composite invoice, multiple line items. One of the line items is a supplier reference code. We ran it in the last 5 minutes. The code traces to a shell company in Delaware. The registered agent for that shell company," he looked at her, "is also the registered agent for the private contracting firm named in Garrett's evidence file." She took that in. The pharmaceutical supply chain, the contractor pipeline selling mission data, the same financial infrastructure underneath both. Renwick had been a local node. Hartman had been a local node. The hospital had been a junction point, not just a place they used, but a functional component of a network that extended from a military unit that officially didn't exist to a Delaware shell company to a server room in a mid-sized Colorado hospital. And Garrett had known enough of it to be worth killing. "How wide is this?" she said. "We don't know yet. Wider than tonight." A pause. "Probably wider than Duskfield." She looked at the conference room door, behind which Renwick was waiting for his lawyer. She looked at the OR corridor, where Hartman was now in a different conversation with Sola. She thought about the dark sedan on the service road, contained but not yet fully processed. She thought about the blinking green light on the server room device, patient and steady in its 50-minute extraction, pulling 14 months of records from a hospital that had been used as infrastructure for something most of the people working in it had no idea existed. "The staff here," she said. "The nurses. The ER team. They came in tonight because there was a crisis. They don't know any of this. They'll be briefed appropriately. They came into a building that was being used against them." She said it without heat, just fact. They deserve to know that the people who made that decision are not going to walk away from it. Fitch looked at her for a moment. "They won't," he said. She pushed off the wall. "I need to check on my patient," she said. She was halfway down the corridor when her phone rang. Not a text, a call. The number on the screen was the same Colorado area code that had appeared on Renwick's phone in the conference room. The number that had triggered the remote data wipe. The number that meant someone had been in communication with Renwick minutes before his arrest and had been watching the building closely enough to know when to act. The number was calling her. She stared at it for 2 full rings. Then she answered. Silence on the line. Not dead silence, active silence, the kind with breathing behind it. And then a voice she recognized. Not from tonight, not from the building, not from the people she'd encountered in the last 2 hours. From before. From a room with no windows, and a man who had given her a contact number for emergencies only. "Dillon," said the voice that had debriefed her 3 years ago, "I think it's time we talked about what you actually know." She didn't move, didn't look around for the major, didn't signal anyone. She just stood in the corridor with the phone against her ear and let the silence run for 3 full seconds before she spoke. "You gave me that number," she said, 3 years ago. "You said it was for emergencies." "I did," said the voice. "And tonight someone used a number from the same exchange to trigger a remote wipe on Renwick's phone." A pause. "I'm aware of what happened tonight." "That's not a denial." "No," the voice said. "It isn't." She moved to the window at the end of the corridor, the same window she had stood at 20 minutes ago watching the sedan in the parking lot. The lot was still full of lights. The sedan was still boxed in. She looked at it while she processed what she was hearing and what she wasn't hearing. "You want to tell me who you are," she said. "Actually, you know who I am. I know you debriefed me after Khotan. I know you gave me a number. I know that number exists in the same infrastructure as the one used to protect Renwick tonight." She paused. "I know that those things can't both be true in a way that makes you clean." Another pause. Longer this time. "What I'm going to tell you is going to be difficult to receive," the voice said. "I need you to let me finish before you respond." She didn't agree to that. She waited. He took it as agreement. "The number I gave you was a legitimate emergency contact, my number, my personal line, not connected to any official channel. The number that was used on Renwick's phone tonight was spoofed from the same exchange. It was designed to look like it came from the same origin point to create confusion in exactly this kind of investigation." A pause. "Someone has been running a parallel operation using infrastructure that mirrors legitimate classified contacts. They built it deliberately. If anyone traced those calls, the confusion would point toward authorized channels, toward people like me, and the real origin would be buried." She listened to the fan noise of the building's ventilation and thought about this. "Who?" she said. "The contracting firm in Garrett's file. They didn't just sell mission data. They built a counterintelligence layer around the operation. Spoofed identities, mirrored communication infrastructure, a set of false trails that would implicate authorized personnel if the network was ever exposed." His voice was controlled, but underneath the control there was something that sounded like exhaustion. Not tonight's exhaustion, older than that. "I found out 6 weeks ago. I've been trying to document it through channels that wouldn't trigger the spoofing protocol. Tonight moved the timeline." "Garrett moved the timeline," she said. "Yes. And you called me because you're the only person in this building tonight who has direct personal knowledge of both the Khotan operation and the current situation, and whose connection to both cannot be spoofed or fabricated. You are Dillon. He paused. You're the corroborating witness the investigation needs that I can't manufacture, and they can't imitate. Your testimony connects the legitimate classified history to the fraudulent infrastructure in a way that no document can. She stood at the window. Outside, one of the police cruisers cut its lights. The parking lot was beginning the slow transition from crisis to aftermath. That specific shift when the emergency personnel stop moving fast and start moving methodically, which meant the immediate threat was contained and the longer work was beginning. You could have told Fitch this, she said. Fitch has the documentation. He doesn't have the chain of custody on the personal testimony. That requires me to come in, which I am prepared to do. But I needed to speak to you first because when I come in, they're going to ask about you, about what your role was, about what you knew and when. A pause. I want you to know that what I tell them will be accurate, all of it, including the parts that make my debrief 3 years ago look insufficient. She understood what he was saying. He was telling her that his debrief had classified her knowledge, had filed her away, had treated her as a contained variable rather than a person who deserved the full picture. He was telling her this was wrong. He was telling her this before he walked into a federal investigation, which meant the telling was intentional. An acknowledgement offered before it could be required. It wasn't an apology. It was more structural than that. It was a person with institutional power admitting, without being forced to, that the institution had been wrong about how it used her. She didn't know what to do with it except hold it and move forward. "Come in," she said. "Ask for Agent Fitch. Tell him Dillon cleared the contact." She hung up. She stood at the window for another 30 seconds. The parking lot, the cruiser with the cut lights, the sedan, still boxed in, going nowhere. Then she went to find Fitch. What followed was 4 hours that she would remember afterward not as a sequence of events, but as a texture. The particular exhaustion sharpness of giving a formal statement while running on no sleep and the residue of adrenaline, the specific smell of the conference room with too many people in it, the way the morning light started coming through the windows around 6 a.m. and made everything look both more ordinary and more strange. She gave her statement twice. Once to Fitch, once to a woman from the Inspector General's office who arrived at 5:30 and asked different questions in a different order and wrote everything in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil. The woman had the precise, deliberate manner of someone whose entire professional value was in not missing things, and she did not miss things. The voice on the phone, she learned his name was Aldous Crane, Deputy Director of Classified Operations for a contracting oversight division that existed at a level of classification she had only been adjacent to. Arrived at the hospital at 4:45. She watched him come through the main entrance from the second-floor window. He was exactly as she remembered. Older, but the same essential shape of person. He was met by Fitch and 2 other agents and escorted to a separate conference room, and whatever happened in that room happened without her. She didn't need to be in it. She had said what she knew. She had said it accurately and completely, including the parts she hadn't thought about in 3 years, and the parts she wasn't sure were relevant but offered anyway because thoroughness was its own kind of protection. The IG investigator had thanked her in the flat, professional way that wasn't really about gratitude but was about completing a protocol, and Cara had accepted it in the same register. At 6:15, the major found her in the second-floor corridor where she had apparently decided to exist until someone told her she could leave or something else required her. "Garrett's out of surgery," he said. She closed her eyes, just briefly. The OR team found a grade 2 hepatic laceration, minor, managed. He'll need 2 to 3 weeks in patient recovery, then several months before he's at anything close to functional capacity. A pause. "He's asking for you." She went. The recovery room was on the 3rd floor, adjacent to the OR suite, where Sophia Reyes was still somehow on duty, moving with the particular determination of someone who had decided that normal work was the appropriate response to an abnormal night. Sophia looked at Cara when she passed and gave her a nod that meant something. Not gratitude exactly, more like acknowledgement. The recognition of a person who had been in the same building on the same night and had made the same choice about staying. Garrett was in the 3rd bay from the door. He had the gray-yellow color of someone who had lost blood and was beginning the slow work of restoring it, and his eyes, when they opened, were clear but operating at reduced power. "You look terrible," she said. "You look like you've been awake for a day." 26 hours, roughly. He looked at the ceiling. "The file. Did they get it?" The vest was in evidence storage. The paramedic unit logged it as part of the scene documentation. Fitch has it. She paused. "He has the device extraction from the server room too, and Renwick's records, and Hartman's invoices, including a photo that a resident named Park had the sense to keep." She paused again. "And a deputy director who's currently in a conference room explaining how a spoofed communication network was built to implicate legitimate operations. Garrett, they have everything." He was quiet for a moment. "How many nodes?" he asked. Duskfield was one. "There are others." Fitch said wider than the city. "The IG is involved now, which means it expands outside what DCIS can handle locally." "Halcyon," he said. The word came out without weight, without the specific gravity it had carried in the corridor and the supply room and the utility spine. Just the name of a thing. "The people we lost." "They'll be part of the record," she said. "Everything you built will be part of it." He nodded. He didn't say anything else about it. She understood that. There was nothing to say about it that the record wouldn't say better. And the record was real now, documented and in federal hands, and no longer something that could be erased with a power failure and a maintenance uniform. She sat in the chair beside his bed. "You should sleep," she said. "So should you." "I'm going to. Soon." She looked at the monitor beside him. Sat 97, pulse 74, pressure coming up steadily. His body doing what bodies did when you stopped asking them to do the impossible and gave them the resources to repair. "I need to check on a few things first." "Dillon." She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. It came out without performance, just the words, in the voice of someone who had operated for years in a world where gratitude was not standard currency and who was choosing to spend it anyway. She didn't deflect it. She also didn't make it larger than it was. "Don't pull that IV out," she said. "I'll know." She left him to sleep. Inchtis. The public part of it started just before 9 a.m. She was in the locker room, the same bench, the same echoing tile, the same locker, changing into the spare set of scrubs she kept for exactly the kind of shift that became something else entirely when Jamie knocked on the door and then came in without waiting, which was how Jamie operated when Jamie had decided something needed to be said. "Press is outside," Jamie said. 3 vans. Someone leaked that there was a federal operation at the hospital. There was a federal operation at the hospital. Don't be difficult. Jamie sat down on the opposite bench. She looked at Cara the way she had never quite looked at her before, directly, without the layer of professional navigation that usually sat between them. "They arrested Renwick this morning. Formally. Not the detained thing from last night. Actual arrest. They walked him out the main entrance in handcuffs." Cara had missed this. She had been in the recovery room. "The staff saw it," Jamie said. "Everybody saw it, because the press was already there." "Good," Cara said. Jamie blinked. "People deserve to know what was running inside this building," Cara said. "The staff worked here. They deserve to know." "Hartman, too," Jamie said, quieter. "They took him about 20 minutes after Renwick. He came out of it very differently. Renwick was quiet. Hartman talked. He talked the whole way from the conference room to the entrance, and none of it..." She stopped. "None of it was a confession. It was all still the performance." "It doesn't matter," Cara said. "What he says is his business. What they have is the record." Jamie was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology," she said. Cara looked at her. "Last night, when Renwick dismissed you in the trauma bay, I didn't say anything." Jamie's jaw was tight. "I've not said anything more times than last night. You'd flag something and I'd relay it without attribution. Or I'd relay it after there was enough other pressure that it seemed like the right call anyway, and nobody had to admit where it came from." She paused. That wasn't okay. And I knew it while I was doing it." Cara sat with this. It would have been easy to accept the apology cleanly, to say it was fine, to move past it, to make the moment comfortable. She had been making moments comfortable for other people for 3 years, and she was tired of it. "You're right that it wasn't okay," she said. "And I appreciate you saying it." A pause. "I also think you're not the only one who did it, and you're the only one apologizing, which means you're probably not the worst of it." Jamie let out a breath. "No, probably not. I'm not interested in holding it over you. I'm interested in it being different." "Yeah," Jamie said, me too." It wasn't resolution in the tidy sense. It was two people in a locker room at 9 in the morning deciding to acknowledge something that had existed for 3 years and was going to take longer than one conversation to reconstruct. But the acknowledgement was real, and real was enough to start with. The board meeting happened at 10. Cara hadn't expected to be in it. She was informed of it by the major, in passing, with the particular brevity of someone who considered it a logistical update rather than significant news. And she stood in the back of the hospital's main conference room, still in her spare scrubs, while the acting board chair read a prepared statement into a room that contained roughly 30 hospital staff, 2 federal agents, 3 board members, and the kind of silence that comes when a community is learning that its institutions had a different shape than it thought. The statement covered the basic facts. Director Renwick had been arrested on federal charges related to network infrastructure tampering and conspiracy in connection with an ongoing federal investigation. Dr. Hartman had been arrested on charges related to pharmaceutical procurement fraud. Both had been removed from their positions, effective immediately. An independent oversight committee would conduct a review of hospital operations going back 14 months. Staff with any information relevant to the review were encouraged to come forward through the IG office contact that was being posted to the staff portal. The acting board chair was a woman named Dr. Priya Nambiar, who ran the oncology department and who had been pulled into this role at 6 in the morning and was handling it with the rigid, functional composure of someone operating well outside their comfort zone, but refusing to show it as a weakness. When she finished the prepared statement, she looked up from the page. "I want to add something that's not in the prepared remarks," she said. "This hospital's systems were compromised from inside its own leadership. The people who kept this building running last night, who kept patients safe and continued providing care during a power failure and an active federal operation, did so without knowing the full scope of what was happening. That required a kind of trust in this institution that this institution had not earned." She paused. "We are going to have to earn it. That work starts today." In the back of the room, Cara felt something shift. Not dramatically, not with any of the clean catharsis that people in stories were supposed to feel at the moment of resolution. It was more like the specific sensation of having been under a weight you had adjusted to, and then having the weight removed and realizing only in the absence of it how long you had been compensating. 2 people near the front turned and looked at her. Then more. She hadn't expected this. She didn't particularly want it. That was the honest answer. She didn't need a room full of people looking at her because the validation of a room full of people was not the thing she had been missing. What she had been missing was simpler and harder to give. The basic acknowledgement that she saw what she saw. That what she knew was real. That her standing was not contingent on whether someone with a title confirmed it. But the room was looking at her anyway, and she stood in it without shrinking. Dr. Nambiar caught her eye. "Nurse Dillon," she said. Not loudly, just clearly. "The board owes you a formal acknowledgement. I'll be requesting a meeting with you this week to discuss what that looks like in practice. But I didn't want to wait for the formal version to say it in front of the people who were here." The room was quiet. "Thank you," Cara said. It came out the same way Garrett's thanks had come out. Without ceremony, just true. She left the conference room before it dissolved into the smaller conversations that would fill the next several hours. She had more to do, and she was operating on 27 hours without sleep. And she was not interested in being present for the social recalibration of people who had watched her get dismissed in a trauma bay 14 hours ago and were now reconfiguring their category for her. She was not angry about it exactly. She understood how institutions worked, how they rewarded visibility and penalized the kind of competence that didn't announce itself. She had spent 3 years being the invisible variable, the nurse who covered extra shifts and flagged things that got attributed elsewhere and went home without ceremony. She had not been invisible because she was weak. She had been invisible because she had not yet decided to be seen. That had changed last night. Not because she had chosen heroism, she hadn't. She had chosen not to walk away from something she recognized, and everything else had followed from that single choice, made in a trauma bay at 10:47 p.m. because a man's wounds told her something she couldn't unknow. The skill was always there. The knowledge was always there. The only thing that had been missing was the room that acknowledged it existed. She found that room for herself. Nobody gave it to her. At 11 a.m., Fitch met her in the corridor outside the locker room with the look of a man who had more to say than his expression usually permitted. "Crane's testimony corroborates yours," he said. "The spoofed communication infrastructure is documented. We have 19 individuals across 4 states currently under investigation in connection with the contracting firm. Duskfield is the furthest the network reached into civilian healthcare infrastructure, which makes the evidence from this hospital central to the federal case." He paused. "Your testimony is formally part of the evidentiary record. Your name will be redacted from public filings for the duration of the active investigation." "How long?" she said. "Unknown. Could be months. Could be longer." "And after?" "After, what you did tonight will be part of the public record." He looked at her steadily. "For what it's worth, Dillon, I've worked federal operations for 11 years. What you managed with a portable SAT monitor and a broken intercom is not something I have a standard category for." She looked at him. "I was a medic," she said. "I used what I had." "I know." A pause. "I also know that's not the whole explanation, but I understand it's the one you prefer." He left her with that. She changed out of her scrubs. She collected her bag and her jacket and her stethoscope from the hook where she'd dropped it at the start of a shift that had become something else entirely. She walked through the ER on her way out. The first time she'd been back on the floor since the night before, since the moment Renwick had told her to go home. The trauma bay looked like a trauma bay. Clean, reset, the gurney in its position, the monitors back online with the grid restored. Someone had cleaned the equipment she'd used. The supply cart was restocked. The room had absorbed what happened in it the way rooms do, taking the shape of an ordinary space again, concealing what it knew. Mr. Aldecoa from Bed 4 had been discharged after his cath lab procedure. She checked the board when she passed it, out of habit, the way she always checked the board. He had gone home at 8 a.m. The notes from the cardiology team referenced an initial nursing flag from 2-100 that had prompted their urgent response. No name attached to the flag. Just a nursing flag. She stood at the board and looked at it for a moment. Then she walked out. The morning was cold and bright in the way that Colorado mornings were cold and bright. The specific quality of high-altitude sunlight that didn't warm you so much as expose you, everything sharp-edged and clear. The parking lot still had 2 unmarked vehicles in it and 1 police cruiser at the far end. The press vans were on the street beyond the main entrance, which she avoided by taking the side exit. She sat in her car for a moment, not because she needed to, just because she could. Because the car was her space and the morning was outside it, and she had 27 hours of something that needed somewhere to land before she drove home. She thought about Garrett asleep in the recovery room with his SAT at 97 and his hepatic laceration beginning its repair. She thought about Renwick in federal custody. She thought about Hartman talking all the way to the exit in a performance that hadn't saved him. She thought about Park photographing every document he signed because a senior resident told him to, which had turned out to be the kind of small, careful habit that changed the outcome of a federal investigation. She thought about Sophia Reyes locking an interior door when a voice from a broken intercom told her to. She thought about Crane's voice on the phone, saying the thing he should have said 3 years ago in a room with no windows. Not an apology. Something more structural. The acknowledgement that she had been used as a contained variable instead of trusted as a full person. She thought about what it had cost her to be that contained variable. The years of covering shifts nobody saw. The flags that got attributed elsewhere. The 19 hours and 40 minutes that ended with a man telling her she didn't have standing. She thought about the fact that none of it had touched the actual thing she was. It had buried it, inconvenienced it, made it invisible. But the knowledge was still there. The steadiness was still there. The hands that didn't shake were still there, and the moment something was real enough to require all of it came. That was the thing about being dismissed for long enough. It could make you believe the dismissal. It could make you participate in your own erasure, covering extra shifts and deflecting and making moments comfortable and going home to a dead plant you kept forgetting to replace. What it could not do, what no director's flat voice and no administrator's corridor command and no carefully managed chart attribution could do, was take the competence itself, That was hers. Had always been hers. Would still be hers after the federal case concluded and the hospital rebuilt its oversight structure and everything in the world of Duskfield, Colorado settled into its new shape. She started the car. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't look at it. Then she did. "This is Nambiar. I have your number from the staff directory. I'm not waiting until this week. I'd like to meet tomorrow. I have a proposal regarding trauma unit oversight I'd like your input on. P. Nambiar." She read it twice. Input. Not consultation, not a performance review. Input. The word of someone who wanted to hear what she actually thought before a decision was made, rather than after it had already been implemented. It was a small word. It was not a small thing. She typed back, "Tomorrow works. Morning is better." She put the phone in the cup holder and pulled out of the parking space. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired in the way that comes from having put everything you have into a single night and being grateful, in the quiet aftermath, that you had enough to put in. She felt the specific relief of things being true, the particular satisfaction of a world that had briefly and seriously tried to be wrong about her and had failed. She felt, underneath all of it, something that she didn't have a clean name for, but that sat in her chest like ballast, like something that had been unmoored for 3 years and had found its way back. She drove through Duskfield in the morning light, past the coffee shops opening their doors, and the construction on 5th Street that had been ongoing since last spring, and the elementary school where kids were arriving in coats because it was still cold at this altitude in this season. The ordinary world, moving through its ordinary morning. She was part of it, had always been part of it, had spent 3 years trying to be only part of it, to fit neatly into its category of regular ER nurse who covers extra shifts and does not complicate things, and had finally, irrevocably, failed at that particular project. It turned out that failure, in this case, had saved a man's life and broken a network and put 2 people in federal custody and given a resident with a camera habit the moment to matter. She had not set out to do any of it. She had set out to go home. And somewhere between the trauma bay door and the supply corridor in the dark, she had remembered that going home was not the same as leaving, that silence was not the same as peace, that the weight you learn to carry quietly is still weight, and the skill you learn to hide is still skill, and the moment that finally asks for everything you've been conserving, that moment will always find you exactly as capable as you actually are. Not as capable as you've been told you are, not as capable as the room decides to see, as capable as you actually are. She turned onto the road that led to her apartment, windows down despite the cold, the Colorado morning loud and clean around her. Behind her, Mercy Hollow Regional Medical Center stood in the full light of a day that was going to be hard and necessary and a long time in the reckoning. Ahead of her was a bed and a dead plant she needed to replace, and a meeting tomorrow morning with a woman who wanted her input. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, after everything, exactly right.